Yes, well, my commission was one of 7 at the time by the Wicklow County Council, and I was asked to basically do a portrait of the village of Enniskerry. And my project, I suppose if I were to say the deliverables of my project, consists of a series of large-scale color photographs as well as an artist book. But I suppose importantly as well, and I consider this a deliverable, not just a means to the end, is engagement with the people in Enniskerry over the course of about, I suppose it was about a year and a half, all told. Well, I guess, well, first and foremost, it was the brief. And I suppose in some ways it was what the brief wasn't as much as what it was, in the sense that they were very, very broad about the kind of work that they would consider. I've always had this kind of sense that most of the Percent for Art scheme commissions are, basically a permanent structure on the side of a road or something like that. This was very, very broad. In the brief, they said they would consider temporary work as well as permanent work, all kinds of media. So first and foremost, within the context of Enniskerry, they seem to be quite open about what they would consider. And that, I suppose that eliminated one big barrier to me. And then secondly, I kind of looked at this as an opportunity to do a project using photography, still photography. I had kind of dabbled in it for a while, but I'd never done a big body of work. So for me, this was an opportunity to get the funding and support that I needed in order to try new media. So I suppose those would be the 2 main reasons. The third is that Enniskerry itself has always been a place that interested me. So across those 3 things, that kind of piqued my interest. Well, I suppose the first piece of advice would be that I think the Wicklow County Council's brief was a good template. And again, this is coming from my standpoint in the sense that they allowed for a lot of leeway in how the artist would interpret the brief within certain constraints. And I can accept that that would be required for a local county council. Presumably they need something that is relevant to their particular area. So first I would say I think theirs would be a great template to use in the sense of the flexibility to the artist. But also I think they were quite clear about what they were looking for in each of the individual briefs. I suppose the one constructive criticism I would have, and maybe this gets into possibly another question you might have, is the one place that I found difficult in the whole process was at the contract stage, after we had actually gone through 2 rounds of selection. They chose me for the Enniskerry piece, and then we got into the contract. I was quite surprised at some of the things that they were looking for. And if that's the case, they should probably put more of that in the brief as well, so that there aren't any surprises when you get down to, dotting the I's and crossing the T's in terms of the contract. The selection process was excellent, I have to say, for a couple of reasons. First, starting with the brief, as I said, they were very clear about what they were looking for. Secondly, once I got past the first stage, they gave everyone a fee who went to the second stage. I think it was €500, so you're actually compensated a bit for your time. I put a lot of time into developing the second, actually both stages. When it came time to sit down with the panel, and there was kind of an interview. I found they were very fair, very clear. It was very timely in their decision making. It didn't take them lots of time to make their decisions, and that's very important, because when an artist sort of starts on a trajectory of a project, they want to have an answer in a fairly timely way. So that whole process was excellent. I don't see any delineation. I suppose part of that comes from the standpoint, when I see a possibility or an opportunity to apply for a public art commission, or when I've been asked to do one, I suppose I first ask myself, does it fit with my practice? And if it doesn't, then I quickly move on. So I think you have to make that decision up front. And what I've seen, even in the short time that I've been here, is that it seems to me that, at least anecdotally, the public art commissions that are sort of being out there to propose to are getting broader and broader and looser, so that the artists can make room to fit them into their own practice. And frankly, I think the worse than applying for a commission, say a public art commission, and not getting it, is applying for one that you don't really want to do and getting it. So I suppose my advice would be, if it's not something you really want to do and it doesn't fit with your practice, don't pursue it. And at the same time, I think, particularly with the funding that's available, for me, particularly in the case of Wicklow, but in another case as well, I've used that funding to really make a big jump forward or jump sideways in my own practice that I really wouldn't have been able to afford to do.
Okay.
So I think you have to kind of first start with what do you want, and then see if there's a win-win scenario out of that. Well, again, I suppose it depends on the particular scenario. In the case of the Wicklow Commission in Enniskerry, I ended up talking to, I never set out to do this, but it just sort of happened. I ended up talking to, I'd say, the better part of 100 people, either in groups or one-on-one. And I suppose I kind of think of it as, first you have to decide how do you want to engage with them, and then I think you have to be quite smart about finding an in. In the case in Wicklow, I suppose I came at it from a lot of different places. I knew a local real estate agent in the area, but also I spoke to some man in some little bookshop who put me on to this fellow who's the chairman of the Kilmechanic Historical Society, and this guy just took me under his wing and started introducing me to people, and then I kind of asked them who else I could meet, and it just one thing led to another. It can be tricky, but I suppose it can be really rewarding at the same time. And again, you have to kind of step back and say, well, what is it that I'm trying to do here? And back to the earlier question, is this really something, a project I want to do? And is the public engagement that I've designed as part of that project something I want to do? And if it's something you really want to do, to me, it's like any other material that you're using in making work. You find a way to make it happen. And like I say, in the case of Wicklow, I didn't necessarily need their help. I remember they wrote me up a letter, kind of an introductory letter that I could use, and it's still in the envelope. I've never used it. I can envision another scenario where that would be mandatory to kind of break into a community. So I suppose it depends. And I guess my sense is, if it's something where you think you're going to have a lot of difficulty breaking in and the project's dependent on it, maybe that should be something that's agreed up front as part of the local council's responsibility, so that there aren't any issues later on in terms of who's going to help who.